So again, my name is Dan Brown. Just to give you a little bit of background about, what's that audio? Is that okay? Just give you a little background about myself. I graduated my Bachelor's of Science in Architecture from UNLV in Las Vegas in 2006. There I was a national director for American Institute of Architecture students. And my actual first job outside of working at an architecture firm during school was actually working for Google. So I traveled the country. At that time, SketchUp was owned by Google. So I traveled the country and some parts of the world actually teaching SketchUp to architects, designers, basically anybody who was using SketchUp for 3D modeling and presentations. Part of that, after I was done with my contract at Google, I started my own company, DB3D, where I offer SketchUp training as well as design consulting to architects, designers, anybody who needed any kind of 3D visualization. Any of you not used SketchUp before? Any just sort of heard of it and looking to see what it's about? So this hour, I really kind of want to show you what SketchUp's all about. And even if you are a little bit familiar with SketchUp, I just want to show you how it's used in the design profession. My background and focus with SketchUp is really more architectural, so I use it more in architects and interiors. But my positions really give me the ability to sort of branch off and explore other professions and other ways in which SketchUp is being used. And I think that's a great thing about this tool is that, in architecture school, I just wanted to be an architect, and now doing what I do, I'm able to design and do a lot of different things in a lot of different professions and sort of areas. Feedback. So SketchUp is really the most intuitive way to design, document, and communicate. Specifically with SketchUp and its sister program, which is called Layout, where you can do basically annotated document drawings with Layout. This is an example that an architect used using SketchUp and Layout. So the model was done in SketchUp, and then all of the dimensions and text and annotations were done in SketchUp. So if you're familiar with SketchUp, these were saved as scenes, and then in Layout, you can import these scenes as views, and then you can call out specific things. What's great about this is you can basically make changes to the model in SketchUp, and then just update your Layout file, and all of your views are instantaneously updated. This is an example of a project that I did for rendering for a client in Northeast Philly. It's a combination of SketchUp, Photoshop, feature that we used this morning, which was a feature called Photo Match in SketchUp, where you can position a photo and be able to model directly from the photograph to get the right scale and angle of the photo. Any interior designers here? No, interior designers? Well, even if you're architecture, is everybody architecture here? Any not-architecture students? Okay. So I'll keep it sort of specific to architecture, but I'll give you some feedback on just other ways it's used. Interior design use SketchUp a lot. This technique here, basically the model was created with sort of just a simple framework of the space. And then you save that as a white and sort of a hidden line is the term model. Bring it into Photoshop, save it at like 25 or 10% opacity just so that your lines are very light and gray. And then on that printout, you just trace over it all of your detailing and color to really do this nice illustration. If you had to do that all by hand, it would be a lot more intensive. And I did okay in two-point perspectives, but there's no way I could create this much detail in a model there. This is just another example of just some interior design. So This is a rendering of a conference sort of lobby. So there's conference rooms in the back here with glass. This is a combination of SketchUp with a plugin called Podium. And Podium allows you to, SketchUp on its own doesn't create reflections and doesn't create lighting. So this plugin inside of SketchUp allows you to assign material properties as well as assign light emitters. So in this case, I was able to assign these lights and create some reflection to really add some ambient occlusion or some realism to the photo. SketchUp used a lot in engineering, so this really complicated, detailed model that I have no idea what it is. But it's used a lot. HVAC designers use SketchUp a lot in developing these very complex structures here. Landscape design is really another great tool for using SketchUp. We did a little example earlier where you can actually get locations from Google Earth or Google Maps, bring it into SketchUp to get topography. And this is an example of a model where these trees are 2D trees, so they're not really high polygon files. They just sort of always face the camera and make for a nice, real sort of compelling model here. It's also easy just to grab sort of landscape elements where you can grab shrubs and elements and start to develop any kind of landscape here. If you're interested in game design, SketchUp you can export out as a collada file, which is sort of a universal 3D file, so you can actually take any of the structures or background geometry and actually bring that into SketchUp. There's actually, we did some trainings at Pixar. There's actually part of Pixar Studio uses SketchUp in their early conceptual design sort of framework to build their models, and then they take it into Maya or whatever they're doing to create those. SketchUp's a really good resource for exhibit design. This is a set of American Idol. I didn't work on this, but the designer here, it's a really compelling, easy way to sort of visualize what that set's going to look like. This is a set design that I helped collaborate with. They're in Philadelphia. There's an annual flower show. It's a Philadelphia flower show. It's this huge event in Philadelphia for some reason. But each year is a theme at the exhibit center, and I'll show you an animation that I did later for them. Basically, for their marketing piece, they wanted to show how they were taking visitors through the first 3 exhibits, and then they'd use that to promote and sort of sell sponsorship of the event. So this first exhibit is, this is SketchUp with a plugin called Light Up, where you can actually animate textures, so you can make textures move. And you'll see why later, because this whole structure is actually viewer projected, so it's projected from above, and it's supposed to replicate the feeling that you're underwater. And there were some 1,200 orchids that sort of landed throughout the entire exhibit here. Any of you getting into construction or construction management, SketchUp's used heavily to simulate 4D sort of animations as well as figure out site logistics. And this is a company called Mortensen Construction. They use it a lot to really kind of verify where existing structures are, where your your truck wheel washes are, where your fence lines are, how far your crane is extending from your site. Very, very high detailed models that really kind of set a blueprint for how a building's going to be put together. This is another one of their examples where they're figuring out sort of mock-up details. So there's a lot of this that in a 2D plan and section cut you can start to understand it, but until you really get into 3D and sort of visualize what the detailing is going to be, this certainly saves them a lot of time and really helps their team really know what they're building. There's sort of a cult following for SketchUp for woodworkers. My experience with it is not so much woodworking, but more using a laser cutter. So I would try and build my SketchUp model, scale it down to however big I needed it to fit to laser cut out the pieces here. But in woodworking, it's really used a lot to really plan out your cuts. There's actually plugins that you can take your sheets and actually figure out all your cut lines and your board feet that you'll need for your model here. Similar to that, I don't know if any of you listened to any of the TED Talk videos. There was an architect recently that did a project using the WikiHouse. Anybody heard of the WikiHouse? Couple? It's a project, they're using SketchUp as their platform, but they're basically CNC milling standard sheets to create basically a house out of standard plywood pieces with no nails, just all sort of joinery based off of the cuts. Check it out, it's a really good TED Talk video. Last couple of years with the buzz of 3D printing, SketchUp is certainly a platform to model from. And I told the staff that I'll give you all the resources for really the process of going from SketchUp to 3D printing. Because basically you can use SketchUp to model it, and then there are plugins that allow you to export it out and simplify geometry to get it to a .scl file. And here are just some examples of that. SketchUp's used quite a bit in the solar industry. There's a plugin that I use. One of my clients is a solar company in DC, and he basically has a 24-hour estimate policy. So anytime anybody goes on his website, wants an estimate for solar on their residential or commercial lot, he sends me an email, the address, and in a matter of an hour or two, I'm able to use this plugin in SketchUp, get the location of it, build it up in SketchUp, and provide him with the total amount of panels that are needed, actually figure out, depending on the panels that he's using at the time, how many kilowatt hours they can get every year. And then in a matter of 24 hours, he has a very detailed plan of how he can use solar. So here, I'll just go through, I have some animations as well as some pictures of just some of the work that I've done. And again, it goes over a broad range from architecture to some exhibit work. So I'll just walk you through, I think it's about 25 slides of some of the work that I've been doing over the years. This is a residential house SketchUp model that I did in, it's a house in Lake Tahoe. This is actually one of the workers for Yahoo. This model was really helpful in their zoning or in their presentation requirements to get their permit. You either needed a physical model or you needed a 3D model of the house because they had certain restrictions on roof pitches as well as material and the general aesthetic of that neighborhood, whatever it was. So this SketchUp model was really helpful in understanding a lot of the detailing that was going into some of the angles here. And then it was just dropped into this photoshopped image that I found here, just to sort of give it some context. Similar situation, this one was for a client in Australia that, I don't know if you've ever worked in metrics, it's a little challenging going from inches to meters, but basically this was a model given all the floor plans and elevations and then generating a 3D model, doing some grass in Photoshop just to kind of brighten up the image a little bit and bring in the sky that was, again, dropped in Photoshop. This is a relatively new project, actually, this week. Yeah, I think these renderings were done earlier this week. A client of mine that I do work for in Philadelphia, he's designing a performance space for CBS Studio in Washington, D.C. there's this new building and they want to move into this new performance space, and they're trying to create renderings and animations for a sponsor of this space. So it's a small sort of recording area that seats, it's probably the same size of this room, but a little bit lower, where an artist could come in, showcase their new album or their new single. And the idea here is to have these TV monitors, a little ticker of the news of that day. But then really it's about getting these renderings, and the animation that you'll soon see is about getting sponsorship for this space. So they can't really build this unless they have the sponsor, and they'll use this in their marketing piece to really get that sponsor. SketchUp was really helpful for the client as well as for the architect to help visualize some ideas. So we had to work around how to figure out the acoustics in the space because it was so low. We had to angle a lot of these top elements to sort of bounce a lot of the noise, as well as use panels on the side here that they could be just fabric, but in this case we could do a print and maybe highlight some artists that are there, as well as throw in the logo there. And this is the animation, which is still sort of a work in progress, but essentially just sort of showing the outside, how you can look into the model. The front of the space here is the studio area, so this is where you have a couple of people talking about whatever is going on. You have a little vendor area to the left, and then it's a small space, so it's only about 12 feet tall, and seats only about 15 people or 50 people. But in this case, you get a sense of what the space could be, what it could really turn into and look like. There is a plugin, I know. I haven't done it personally. I'm not really an acoustic expert, but there is, I know there is like a plugin that you basically build the model and it will calculate all of those simulations. This is really early schematic, so they may take this, and whoever's the lighting and sound acoustic will take that and be able to really calculate from it. This was another animation. Anybody go to Philadelphia to Independence Hall to Liberty Bell? Only 3 of you? Bad Americans. So this is an animation. You're not bad Americans. This is an animation of next to where the Independence Hall is and where the Liberty Bell is held is the visiting center. So this is like the hub where everybody comes in to get all of their tour information, to ride the ducks and all that crazy, touristy traps that the city has. But this is the place that you get all your information from there. And this animation was basically an animation to look at the potential of opening up this gift shop that they had, where it was really closed off. Nobody went into this gift shop because it wasn't like a storefront. So this animation goes through a sequence to really show what the possibilities could be with opening up those skylights, or opening up that storefront. Actually, from here on, used to be the restroom, and what people typically do on Arch Street is they just go in, go to the gift shop, go to the restroom, and then leave. They don't go through this entirely long space and experience anything that the visitor center has to offer. So there's like a theater in there, there's elements from the National Park Services, there's some vendor information throughout the space. So this design really kind of shows how SketchUp was used to redo the gift shop, but then also, in this case, actually move the restrooms in the back of the facility, actually make people walk through the space. Gave them the opportunity as well to put some storage through here. So you have the restrooms. I'll just fast forward through this a little bit. Some more like vending information and just kind of showing the interior finishes. These were similar to what they had, and they were content with them. They were not my favorite finishes. They then had this really wasted shell space over here to the left. So the idea here was to remove those glass windows there, fill in the wall, or fill in the floor plate here, and actually do a legit cafe. They really had just like small like snacks and drinks and nothing to really keep people there. So this option sort of fills this void of this space that they had that eventually they want to expand anyway to build this sort of friendly visitor center. There's also just showing that on the second floor of this, you could increase, I think it's 3,200 square feet of office space. So just further using the space, as well as in this last sort of sequence. Upstairs is a ballroom, and it's a great view of Independence Mall and Independence Hall. And they're really limited in their size, so the animation sequence here really shows how they could extend that balcony and terrace space to increase their ballroom size and really sort of get more larger sort of venues that or larger weddings that they're trying to house. And then just this last one is as you walk through this really long, tall, narrow space, there's nothing that really tells you you're here at information desk or whatever it is. So this last option was really just sort of branding a new sort of information desk that sort of protrudes out into the space and really gets people to know where they're going to and provide information through that. It also, in the later end of this, there's 4 or 5 vendors that rent spaces here. And the idea here is to create uniform design standards for those vendors, so it's not a bunch of crappy flyers that are just posted all over the place. So this is still a very large work in progress because it's a strong political battle that they have going on here. But it was really helpful in telling their board what their possibility was. They looked at all of these in plan and said, like, okay, we can move this, we can move that. But really getting it into SketchUp really helped them sort of visualize what all the opportunities were. This is just an example of some interiors that I've done. So this was a redesign of an office restroom sort of corridor. This was a 3M film, and the architect wanted to see what that would look like in the space here, particularly from the inside, because it is transparent. You do have sort of a halo that you can look into that space just to kind of visualize. Again, this is with SketchUp and the plugin called Podium. Just some other interiors. This one is of a training room. So this is sort of a axonometric showing sort of walk-in. You have a sort of more of a lecture hall and then a seating classroom, sort of a lounge area, and then just sort of an informal area there. Just the renderings as well. This was in a basement of this office building, so there's absolutely no light to work with, and the idea here was just to kind of make this space as bright as possible. Similar space, sort of an office cubicle area. This again was in a basement. Ceilings were really low, and the thought here was to really open up and expose the raw concrete that was above there, as well as keep that raw sort of concrete column, and just sort of let the rest tell the story. And this is just sort of a quick animation of it. This was, again, using SketchUp. SketchUp, you can do scene animations, so you can save specific keyframes, but you'll find a lot of times that you get jagged views, so when you go from one scene to another. There's a plugin that you can download. It's called Flight Path. So you actually draw the path that you want the camera to follow, and then you can specify either it to follow eyes straight on your path, or I believe this one, it's following from two points. So the first point, the first point I believe was here. So that's why as you turn here, it's staying center. And then the second point, I believe, now maybe it is just one point. There's two options on that. Done a lot of renderings recently for a client. They're building a new warehouse. They create CNC machine pieces, and they're building this brand new warehouse, and they're doing a cafeteria, an exercise room, a sleeping space, and they're trying to essentially visualize all the interiors for it. And the interior designers gave them just a material board with sample fabrics, and they said, here, this is what you got. And they couldn't visualize it at all, so they brought me on board to take a lot of those material selections, put in like components. So these are components that I found either through SketchUp's 3D warehouse or through a source that I use called Form Fonts, to really sort of look at what the space looks like. And their feedback for this was it looked too hotel-y, and they're sort of a high-tech. They make like parts for Penske Racing, and the owner used to race Formula 1 cars. So they want something more high-tech modern than sort of comfy hotel-esque. So this is a work in progress rendering. I'll show you some other ones of their training room. So this is one of the training room examples, again using SketchUp. It was really helpful for the client to really visualize what these finishes were going to look like and really actually coordinate with the interior designer. The interior designer wanted this wall graphic here, and it's a terrible choice because if you're in a training room, you don't want this crazy zigzag wall, on your side as you're trying to, stay awake and pay attention to what's teaching you. So needless to say, the client is not happy and didn't choose any of these designs. So the interior designers are back on the drawing board trying to do that. As well as I'm assisting them in sort of picking finishes and palettes that are more in line with what the designer wants or what the client wants. I've done some examples of SketchUp for Geo Modeling, and what I mean by Geo Modeling is SketchUp models that are then placed in Google Earth. Has anyone been in Google Earth and seen the 3D models? Is that handful? Basically, when SketchUp was bought by Google for this specifically, in the earlier stages, people would essentially take photographs of a building and then share it to the 3D warehouse. The 3D warehouse would cross-check it, and then if it was a real building, if it was photo-textured, it would then go in Google Earth. And a lot of the buildings that you see in Google Earth are directly from SketchUp users. Since then, though, since like Apple has done their own, and Microsoft has their own, SketchUp sort of had to step up the game and really do a better job at its 3D maps. So unfortunately, not a lot of buildings are now done by SketchUp users in Google Earth. However, they do serve a good tool. This one is actually of my high school from Easton, PA, where Crayola crayons are from, and Larry Holmes. He's a boxer. But I serve on the Technology Education Board for my high school department there. And this was a great exercise for their students, where you could take photographs of the entire high school and actually model it in SketchUp, really understand how it aligns into the site, and really get them to visualize what their school looks like. Another one that I worked on a few years ago, Disney wanted all of their theme parks in Google Earth, and they did an interactive KMZ or Google Earth file that you could literally walk through and experience all of the Disney parks. And I had a small part of that design work, so I got to basically model the Dumbo ride, as well as in Euro Disney, I got to design the entire hotel. If you're outside of Paris, when you come off the train, there's this huge hotel that everybody stays in for Euro Disney. And it was a very interesting process because they sent me pictures and floor plans, and all the floor plans were in French. And they're all scanned PDFs that were basically from, I don't know, the 1970s. So it was really interesting to take scanned PDFs or images, import them into SketchUp, and then just basically trace out sort of the massing model, and then using the photographs to really sort of tell the rest of the story. Just to give you a little process of Geo Modeling, because it is a pretty cool process, and it's sort of interesting. This is photo match for those of you at the morning session. This is sort of a similar exercise. A few years ago, I worked for a client in Livermore, California, where the entire downtown Livermore Association wanted to have their entire downtown in 3D. They really wanted to showcase what the small town looked like. It's sort of a small town like right outside San Jose. And this process was building one of the, I think this is the theater there. And this animation or time lapse is a, I think the model took maybe 2 hours to do, but it's a time lapse going into, you'll see sort of the struggles and going through all the photographs. So somebody went and photographed every sort of nook and cranny of the outside. But then here you get a sense and see sort of the process of cleaning the texture up in Photoshop, because you want seamless textures. You want simple textures. These SketchUp models have to be below a certain bit rate or file size. So you constantly have to save and compress your images, and then sort of finding ways to repeat textures and use them in sort of other areas. So you see here, sort of walking around the front where the ticket booths are. And if this is making you dizzy, I can move forward. I mean, just as an architecture exercise, this is great. Really helped me sort of diagram buildings, and that's sort of one thing that I really appreciated from my education in architecture, is really sort of understanding how to simplify and just mass up the details of the model. In the end, like in any project, you got to figure out how much time you want to spend into it. And for these models specifically, they're only looked at for a couple seconds. You figure you're in Google Earth, you're only orbiting, viewing around a building maybe a minute, tops, maybe 30 seconds. So the idea is how to simplify the model to just show the general shape and framework of it, and then really let the textures do the work. And that really saves a lot of the time within this modeling process. Some work that I've been doing the last 3 years is in environmental graphic design. Anybody know what environmental graphic design is? Good, me neither in architecture school. I had no idea. Environmental graphic design is basically designing, you guys actually have a really nice sign system out here. I don't know if you actually take a look at the sign systems that's on NC State's campus. But graphic design, or environmental graphic design, is basically EGD serves as consultants to architects doing all the signage, as well as you can do interpretive work. The company that I do a lot of work for primarily does signage for healthcare facilities with clients like HGA, Raphael Vignoli Architects, HKS, Perkins and Will, list goes on and on. Prior to my involvement with them, they did all their presentations just in flat elevations because they're all graphic designers. So they only think in paper, think in 2D. Whereas a lot of their elements are in 3D. So a lot of my work there is really being really collaborating with the architect in developing what some of these sign systems look like and how they can integrate. This one here is actually an example of a main entrance sign for a hospital in Owensboro, Kentucky. And the thought here is to use the back plate here. This tile is actually the same tile that's on the front of the building. So we're trying to pull in some of the architecture from the building into the actual signage work here. Another thing about environmental graphic design is it's really about wayfinding and master planning. So, we as architects design, but hopefully we think about the user experience and how people are navigating their space. And that's really critical in environmental graphic design because you're creating signage systems based off of decision points that you have to make as you do your patient or your visitor journey through a space here. So this is an animation done in SketchUp. This was actually, the model was provided from HGA, the architects, to us, and then we just sort of doctored it up, placed in the decision points that we had, and this was like a home run to the clients because they could see exactly where the signs were going to go. The speed of this is actually in that flight path plugin that I mentioned. You can actually set the speed. So in this, if I know this is a 15 mile per hour road, a crucial thing in EGD is your viewer reaction time will help calculate the letter height or the cap height of the letters in order for you to read sort of the signage. So using a model like this, there's a lot of discussion on this main ID sign. And the architects thought it was way too big. They thought an 18-inch letter was just going to be huge out in the middle of this area. However, with the model and with calculations that we had based off of viewer reaction time and your speed, we're able to actually do a good diligence of getting the right size and proportion of that piece there. The last part of that, let's see if this works. The hospital, this place in Owensboro, Kentucky, it serves 11 counties. This hospital serves 11 counties. It's the biggest employer in Owensboro. It's north of Nashville, so for major surgeries, you're either going to Nashville or Louisville. You're probably not staying in Owensboro. But they basically built this entire new facility out off of the Beltway, and a part of training sort of the local area on how to get to the new facility and what's there is they did this new website, and it's basically a virtual wayfinding website. It highlights features of the new facility, but then also allows them to sort of plan their journey as you go through this. The model here was done in SketchUp from that previous model, but then it was sent to a developer in Spain who actually has this, and I'm hoping this will work. Maybe it won't. It probably won't work. I'll send you the link to this if you guys want to. But basically, you can click and orbit into any space of this building here. I really wish this would work. And it was a very cool sort of interactive website for them to look through. But it was a process of using SketchUp, using 3D Max to actually bake the textures onto the faces of the model, because SketchUp can't do that on its own. And then taking that into this engine called Clever. And Clever is this developer from Spain that then they created all the interactions and hotspots that the user could look at. Just some other examples of environmental graphic design. So this was actually a Revit model that the architects developed, and that was brought into SketchUp. Most EGD firms don't use Revit, let alone even AutoCAD. So we asked them to export this out to SketchUp to really get a sense of what this whole lobby space is. Basically, you walk in this entrance, go up these stairs, and they wanted, this institute wanted something to tell their story, and they had this large wall that they wanted to do some kind of graphic treatment. So this was done using, again, a combination of SketchUp, a little bit of Photoshop. This is actually using the section cut tool in SketchUp, where you can basically virtually cut through your entire model. This is another example of, this is actually a donor wall at a hospital. They, for donor programs, so these people are giving millions of dollars to build this new facility. Virtua, the client, wanted to showcase them and do some kind of wall. And they had a really limited space. So this wall here, the back of it was a registration area. And they only had about 6 inches of space, but they wanted something illuminated and something really powerful that sort of tells the story and has some inspirational elements. So the option here was to do a rear projected glass wall. And to achieve that, use SketchUp to actually diagram out how this works. So you have the existing wall, and then there's this company that makes this LED carpet strip. And the technology, back in the day when you had to use fluorescence, you would need a larger space, like 12 inches for your tubes. Now with LED, you only need 4 inches. So you can have a huge illuminated wall with only a 4-inch gap. That way you have no hot spots within the lighting. So the idea here was to do the wall, the LED carpet, the glass panel, and this glass panel has an inner layer of film, so this artwork would never change, and these were like inspirational words, legacy donors, and then the idea is you'd have these standoffs of glass where you could vinyl apply, you know, Dr. Dan Brown, you know, gave $1,000 or whatever. This animation and those renderings was really hard to convince the client originally of the idea just from sort of the static rendering. But in the end, this rendering, although it's a little dark, this helped really convey the idea of the space as you're walking through it. Now this rendering sort of portrayed it very bright, but you'll see in the next photo how it's really much subtle, and this is actually the final install. So here there's this like little coffee bar, and then you have this illuminated wall there. As I mentioned before, you know, I've done a lot of work with solar, so this one here is a combination of SketchUp, using the get location, actually using imagery. So this imagery was a combination of, if you use big maps, you can actually go into bird's eye view. Some cities you can do it in Google Maps, but in DC it's blocked. However, on Bing Maps you can go into bird's eye view and actually snapshot the imagery. And then this was used by the client to basically sell, you know, their opportunities and really visualize how they could put solar on their campus there. And just some other small examples. The last example that I have is probably one of my favorite. This is the flower show that I was explaining earlier. And this was a really big challenge because I'm not a landscape designer nor a florist, so the Horticultural Society was very particular on what types of vegetation was actually portrayed in the model. So most of my time wasn't even creating the SketchUp model. It was in Photoshop and on Google trying to find the exact plant that they were looking for. And this was the animation. So this was with the plugin. It's called Light Up, and it allows you to illuminate textures, kind of like Podium does, but it goes a step further and allows you to actually move textures. So in that, you see the projection screen sort of moving the water, or moving the, yeah, I guess it's the water. And then here, where you get to Pele's garden, you'll see the water moving here. And they actually had a projection screen on here, like a hut, and did like some presentations there as people walked through all the floral exhibits. So that's sort of been my experience this sort of last 5 or 6 years at SketchUp. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have or any feedback.
Can a simple laptop handle all the rendering and those more advanced animation?
Yeah, like this laptop here definitely couldn't. This is a very old laptop, but any new sort of laptop, as long as the graphics card's like an NVIDIA, like 1 gigabyte, like 1 gigabyte, that'll be suffice. Most of the renderings, yeah, it's usually no problem. It's usually when you get more complex models that, because of the model size and complexity, it's going to slow it down. But, like this animation, actually, this animation was all done on my iMac, which is about 4 years old now. So it's not a powerful one, and it's a 50-second animation, and it's subtle, but you may be able to notice it's actually 3 videos. When I tried to animate this all out as one animation, the SketchUp just crashed every time. So you'll notice, let's see, show it right. I think it's right here. You'll see it tick for a second. Actually, you can see the background. See how that just faded in? So it sort of had to break those up into 2. I know you guys have questions.
I have a question about textures.
Uh-huh.
Do you just use the default textures in SketchUp, or do you?
No, they're awful.
Yeah.
The default textures in SketchUp are okay. In school, I tried to keep my SketchUp models as simple as possible and showed more of like shading and color versus texture because I didn't have a good resource of textures. However, towards the later end of my coursework, there's a lot of resources online, and actually a bunch of us in studio got together and purchased, there's this website called, is it Dosh Design? It's a German website that they basically just have texture, like a full texture library. So we bought like a, I don't know, it was like an $800 texture library, but split that among 40 students. It wasn't that bad of a investment. But other than that, there are some, you just gotta sort of search for some. One, like I mentioned before, Form Fonts is particularly for 3D models, but they also do have textures. So if you browse images, they do have a library of textures that you can search from. As well as Podium, the one plugin that I do for photorealistic rendering, it has a this one. It has a Podium Browser, and this has materials as well as components that you can drop in. I think that is like $50 for Podium's browser library. Say that again?
Digital elevation model to import create landscape.
What, is that a DEM?
DEM, yes.
I think there is. I haven't done it. I usually just say Google it. But
Google, does it have elevation?
it does, but it's very simple. The DEM files, is that from like ArcGIS? Okay, yeah. So there is sort of a workaround for that. Usually the DEM files are too big, so you have to parse like a small area. But yeah, usually it's difficult to add all that. There is the Sandbox tool in SketchUp, so you have your contours. You can import your contours, and then you can actually do it for you real quick. So let's pretend these are your contours. There's a tool set called the Sandbox. What you can do is select the terrain, click on the first tool here, which is from Contours, and what it does is it takes those line work, those elements or lines, and triangulates all of the shapes between to create your contour. The challenge is when you get a contour map, typically you'll have elements that are broken, so you might have a break within the line work that kind of is your tag for what height it is. So in some cases you need to actually clean up a little bit of that so that it's one solid line.
What's the best way, say you have that topography and then you want to put your building on there? Do you just combine with your building intersect the faces? Is that the easiest way to put out the landscape? Do you have your building footprint?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that you can do it. So let's say this is our building. There's one crude way of doing it. I don't really like it, but let's see. I think it's stamp. In the Sandbox tool palette, there's a stamp tool, and you can basically stamp the cutout and see how it's adjusting the texture. So I can like cut that through, and then you can just place your building on top. The challenge with that is it creates an offset depending on that size. So what I usually do is I'll just take the terrain, do intersect with model, intersect faces with model, delete out that space. And the trick is to make sure you have that hidden geometry turned on. But you'll see areas that maybe you want to adjust the slope. What you can do in here then is you can move the individual elements. And if you press the up arrow key, see how it forces it up? the blue axes, I could put this basically wherever I want it. Like, so let's say I want that to go right there. I can set that right there. I can set that there. It's a little bit tedious, but you basically have to go through and kind of adjust. And then you can actually move where some of these points are. You have to blend things out. There's another tool within here. It's called the Add Detail. And that basically takes any one of those triangles and it divides it so that you have more detail to sort of mask and adjust the model from. So good resources, just a couple that I'll go over, and you can write these down. So one again for SketchUp components is Form Fonts, although it's a paid subscription. The other one is the 3D Warehouse. So this is a free repository of SketchUp models. What's that?
This library.
Yeah.
DHL library.
Yeah. That's fine. Yeah, there was a competition a couple of years ago to model your campus in 3D. So I think NC State must have done a lot of them, as you can see some of the buildings. Some other resources, SU Podium. And that is the plugin that I www. No, it's SU plugins. Sorry. Yeah, suplugins.com. Another plugin that I use is that one called LightUp. And a lot of these, people have their preference. So there's some photorealistic plugins like Shader Light is one of them. Render It is another. These are all sort of plugins for SketchUp. These are just the ones that I've used that I felt more comfortable with. I've always used Podium, so I'm sort of partial to it. This one LightUp I specifically had to use for that flower shell, and really used it primarily for that and haven't really touched it since, because it's good just really for animations and moving textures, whereas just for still textures it's easier, or still renderings it's easier to do in Podium. Also just for YouTube, if you go to YouTube and / SketchUp video, that is the user channel for SketchUp. The other user channel to take a look at is SketchUp Training, and that's actually my YouTube channel. Trying to update this a little bit more, but SketchUp video would certainly have a lot more videos coming out. I'm in the process right now of releasing a SketchUp DVD, which should be out in a couple months, as long as I can finish the rest of the tutorials. So I'm sure you'll certainly see that online in a couple months. Any other last minute questions? If you want to stick around at 2:30, I'm going to be doing a beginner SketchUp class. So if you are new to SketchUp, definitely stick around. If you started using SketchUp and are stuck on things, hopefully I'll take the next hour and a half to kind of teach you the right habits and workflow when you're beginning a SketchUp model and really understanding the beginning drawing tools. So thanks again for having me, and thanks for coming.